Someone who I learn so much from every single day, Zephyr Teachout.
I lost my notes, so excuse me if I ramble. The first time I heard him, which was just yesterday, I really was genuinely looking for the trumpet he had hidden in his mouth. But of course, since this is about the connection between art and politics, the lesson is that we all have instruments inside us, that maybe we could play some more. So I want to start with a prayer from Robert Creeley, Buffalo poet. I think what it says is, it's prayer, it's the first verse of prayer. Bless something small but infinite and quiet. I think he's talking about solar panels. So I first want to thank you for the work you've done. I mean, much of this tour and program is about what we must and can do, but part of it is about a celebration of the most extraordinary environmental movement of the last 30 or 40 years. You banned fracking. And it wasn't supposed to happen. If you look at an Empower map in 2010, it just doesn't make any sense. And there are so many of you who did extraordinarily brave and creative things that actually caused the shape of this state and the shape of the country and the world to change. Because the statement that was made when fracking was banned about not having my kids play near a fracked well is a statement that is being heard around the world. And you made that happen. So my background before this recent episode is I was a death penalty lawyer in North Carolina for a while. And then for about 8 years, I was an organizer. I was the director of online organizing for Howard Dean's campaign. And then in the years subsequent, did a lot of consulting with nonprofit groups and other groups on sort of structures of organizing. And so I'm really interested in actually the technical parts of what you did. You know, the way that which you use science and law, and then the most beautiful bird dogging I have ever seen in my life. You should remember forever the fracking ban that you caused, but Andrew Cuomo will forever remember many of your faces. And that was incredibly powerful because politicians are human and animal. We listen and read poetry, and we also fear and feel, and the fact that you were physically present obviously really changed the way that he thought about what he had to do. So that was incredibly powerful. The part I want to talk about is the way in which you structured yourself. You may or may not know this, but at one point in American society, 5% of Americans were presidents of their local voluntary association. This is in 1955. Presidents, not members, not having signed a petition. This is the Elks Club, Moose Club, different voluntary associations, and it's cross-class. Didn't tend to be cross-race, but there were African-American voluntary associations and white voluntary associations. And they were so deeply a part of people's identity that if you go to some old graveyards, you'll see, father, husband, Elks Club member. There's a wonderful book about this by Theda Skocpol, The History of Associational Life. And these associations were incredibly important. They're what de Tocqueville talked about when he came to explore our country. If somebody has a thought about a plant, they started a club, he said. If they had a political thought, they'd start a club. This constant club forming is part of our American history. And they created a source of power which was highly local but connected each to the other. So you'd have one local grange connected to another local grange, each doing their own strategy and thinking, but connected to each other through wanderers, people who would travel club to club, and through a broad agenda. And what you did really reminded me of that. Because in the recent years, there's been a very different tradition of organizing. I think of it sometimes as sort of industrial form organizing, like really top-down, and then truly decentralized power. And when I talk about top-down, I'm talking about some of our friends. So, a lot of the big lists and big progressive or populist groups will build a big list and then send out messages telling you what to do. Sign this petition, or watch this video, or call this person. You can think of Move On, which I love, but groups that are fundamentally organized around distributing tasks. There are all these millions of people around the country, tasks to be done, here's the way to perform those tasks. And what you guys were built around was the distribution of power, not the distribution of tasks. So that strategic questions, not just tasks, were actually being developed at the local level. And I think this is both the source of your power and an incredible lesson for the future. It's something that we see right now happening with the extraordinary teachers in New York State and parents in New York State who are following a similar model to protest Andrew Cuomo's starvation agenda for the public schools. It's something that I saw in the recent net neutrality victory. Last Thursday. Let me tell you, in March, right before I started running for governor, I wrote an op-ed saying that Barack Obama should demote the chairman of the FCC, Wheeler, because he was a cable company lobbyist and there was no chance he was going to come around. I'm happy with Wheeler now. Last Thursday, Wheeler announced that we would have net neutrality here in this country. An extraordinary victory that also, with the power map, should not have happened, but was based in a lot of local groups that did a lot of their own organizing and also a lot of bird dogging and real presence. So you built this, and the default direction of the gravity of, I don't know what calls you. I like Merle Haggard and planting flowers. So however you want to spend your time, if you're not doing politics, those things will drag you there. But you have built an architecture that is so incredibly powerful around the state, not just here, that moving it past this fracking ban in New York towards a fracking ban in the country by building a renewable energy future, I think is absolutely essential. Because it's such a deep form of power. So don't throw that out. It's like knocking down a building that you've built after 6 years. Use that building to build the next phase. The other reason it's so important is that we're in a really difficult time, I think, in American society. We're in a monopoly moment, I would say, where across the board we see incredible concentration of power, and that concentration of economic power then flexes its muscle in the political arena. I spent a lot of time in the 1880s thinking, not like hanging out in bars. It's the sort of poetry of liberals, but not what the pragmatists really, it's not practical. It's not feasible. Andrew Cuomo loves stories about himself where he's called muscular. This kind of, it's often a very masculine archetype of just like, what's practical? Well, what's practical right now is that we have 10 times in New York State alone the amount of solar capacity we need to fulfill all our current electricity needs. Right now, if we don't change the science on solar and if we don't change our current consumption patterns, we should be changing our consumption patterns, but we already have that. June 9th last year, 2014, does anybody know what happened that day in the solar world? I know it's an impossible question. June 9th was the first day that Germany had over 50% of its entire electricity needs met by solar alone. And Germany made me know Buffalo in terms of the snow. But its solar capacity is sort of similar to that of Alaska, not of New York. So if Germany can have 50% on June 9th and then eventually 75%, there was one day last year where 75% of all of Germany's electricity needs were met by solar, these are kinds of goals we should be aiming at. Not 80% by 2050, but 100% 10, 15 years from now. Like, we should not be waiting around. We should be building like we built the Erie Canal. There are 250,000 rooftops, solar installations in California. We are not going to let them own the sun. We have 2 million naked rooftops here in New York State that are waiting to be clothed by solar installations. So we can be moving now. We can be moving now on using the power of government in its purchasing power, so that we are actually buying wind, solar as the first priority instead of having our default be these old and toxic systems. And I believe the imagination of New York, which you guys exhibit in so many ways, is ready for that. And I believe it's ready for that in part because of the work you guys have already done. So, one more point I want to make about net neutrality, because I think it's an important lesson from this last week and it relates to this. This is another fight that wasn't supposed to happen, wasn't supposed to succeed. And a key part of it was the 4 million comments by commenters around the country demanding net neutrality. People hate, they don't like their cable provider. They also don't necessarily like the way it's working with their, with coal and natural gas either, but they don't necessarily see an alternative. But the other key was that we actually really drew on some of the commercial power in the sector. So that Netflix actually played a really important role, and Kickstarter and Etsy, and other companies that really saw that if Comcast shut this down, there wouldn't be the opportunity for competition in the creation of content. So I think something similar has to happen here, where while we are again supporting these companies that are really investing in solar and wind and geothermal, that's actually also building a source of political power. And FDR did this brilliantly in his second term, is really engage the medium-sized companies to take on the monopolists and build the small business economy we had for decades and decades. So I started with a Buffalo poet. I got to end with a Fort Greene, Brooklyn poet, because that's where I'm from. And this is actually a mashup of 2 Walt Whitman poems, one about the sun and one about democracy. Give me the silent sun with full beams dazzling, and I will make divine magnetic lands with the divine love of comrades, with the lifelong love of comrades. I will plant companionship thick as trees along the rivers, the Great Lakes, and the prairies. O free and ecstatic sun, O free and ecstatic democracy. Thank you.
Zephyr Teachout. Aren't we so lucky? Aren't we so lucky to have such an incredible, towering intellect and caring person? I have to say, in the room with a lot of media, thank you so much to Governor Cuomo for having that bold leadership to ban fracking, and I truly think it was a bold and incredible, courageous move. But I also have to say, Zephyr, you are our next governor. And we all know it. We all know it. And this is one of those things that you're going to have to spread around.